Hello and welcome back to Why Is This a Podcast? I am your temporary host, James Waters. You wouldn't normally see me as I'm the editor. I'm the one who cuts out all of Kerean's bad jokes. But this week we've got a very special Christmas episode for you. I'd like to introduce our very special guest, Kerean. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, James, for inviting me on to my own podcast as a guest.
That's all right. It's great to
I,
have you.
I'm privileged.
I wanted to ask you what your inspiration was for starting this podcast.
Obviously, when COVID-19 kicked in, the pandemic um, started, and it wasn't this kind of event that happened in a linear way, like a disaster film. And living through the pandemic has very much felt like living through a disaster film. But this was sort of a gradual scaling up of catastrophe. And I was, you know, relishing the opportunity to go out and enjoy in the UK, where I live, if my accent hasn't already given it away, the chance to have a walk or whatnot. And while I'm out walking, I would be listening to a podcast on Spotify about true crime or history or any number of things that I'm interested in. And I just felt like, sod it. I'd like to talk to people. I'd like to interview people. I'd like to have these conversations with people about their lives during lockdown, their fields, their specialties, whether they're in politics or health, or even when I spoke with Aaron Spacey, for example, um, about his experiences as a university student. It was about the inspiration was really, I just want to get people's stories there, especially people whose stories would not be out there in the public sphere um, ordinarily. So that's
Absolutely.
that's effectively what it was.
I think that's a very lovely reason for, starting a podcast.
Well, I was like at the start, I was like, oh, I want to interview, I want to interview you know, Joe Biden or someone.
Mm, yeah.
I want to interview Joe Biden. I want to interview uh, Boris Johnson. I want to interview people with Wikipedia pages. Basically, I want to interview like really famous people. Like, oh yeah, we'll talk and we'll have conversations about that. And I think it hit me probably about a few episodes, about four, I think, 4 or 5 episodes in, where I'm like, there's plenty of people who are going to talk to someone like Joe Biden or Tom Hanks or
The more ordinary stories you're looking for. Yeah.
don't get me wrong, Joe
Mm.
Biden, if he's watching, don't get me wrong, I'd love to talk to him.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you interviewed Gareth David Lloyd. I think that's a very, commendable achievement, especially within one of the first few episodes of this show. I think that's an amazing achievement.
But even when I was speaking to Gareth David Lloyd, it was very, very intimate. It was very much about sort of the fact that his work on the stage.
Mm.
and the theatre being disrupted due to the pandemic. But when I started, the point that I was getting at was that when I started this show, it was like, oh yeah, I'd love to talk to whoever, these high level people. I get a couple of episodes in, and I'm like, the best way for me to do this is to talk to people who are passionate about what they do. And I'm passionate about this, and passion is only ever really effective when it's seen in two ways. So I'm like, yeah, if I got Joe Biden, I'd be delighted. But I'm not. I don't just want people like Joe Biden. I want anybody who cares enough about what they're doing in their community and who care enough about their community to come on my show and talk about that. The way that we talk about the media these days, it's very rare that it's at the community level. Right. So what I'm trying to do here, and what we're doing together, yourself, myself, and Jack, it is very much giving um, airtime and space to people who otherwise may not ever have it. And I guess I started doing this perhaps with grand grand designs of, wonder, and like, oh, I'll do three of these and then I'll get to replace Graham Norton. I got I got like three, four, 5 episodes in, and I'm like, the best way for me to do this is to do it honestly. It's to do it to talk to people. And I'll talk to people the way that it should be, which is to be honest, to be candid, to not care how many Twitter followers they've got, Facebook followers they've got. I'm going to talk to you because I think you're interesting. And because you've got something to say. And I, in my own small way, I'd like to help you say it.
So I just wanted to ask you, what's the most different about doing the podcast than what you expected it to be like?
To be quite honest with you, James, I do think that what strikes me about it is how honest people are willing to be on camera, especially during COVID-19 and lockdown, which is a very, very vulnerable time for people across the planet, the world over. Because as we were mentioning just now, I'm trying to cast a fairly wide net in terms of people who I talk to, whether they're members of the Time 100 or not. But I do want to get a very, very broad range of people to talk. So I want to have people from Africa, Asia, America, the UK, other parts of Europe. And what does strike me again and again and again is how people are vulnerable. in a video interview like this, and I didn't expect that. I did expect people to be far more reticent. I expected them to be a bit more cagey, a bit more walled off. I thought the people would come with pre-prepared answers um, based on the interview subjects, and people are not. They are incredibly open. There's never been a moment in any interview that I've done for this series where I have felt like someone was lying to me. That is the biggest shock that I've had, because people expect with news or broadcasting or internet journalism, whatever you want to call it, they think, oh, they're just going to be lying, or they're going to be telling you, just selling you the talking points. There hasn't been a dishonest note that I've heard on any of these interviews. And that I would say that that's the biggest surprise that I've had. And I'm very, very glad that the biggest surprise that I've had is the one that's actually fairly pleasant, because I'm so glad that I can offer people something bloody honest. What I like about interviewing people about these subjects, because you say they're heavy subjects, but people generally, in these circumstances and in these crises, they find a way to link to themselves. And that is probably what I would say is the other biggest surprise, is that there's been a lot more empathy that I expected from this. I did not expect. I knew that I would be interviewing humans. I didn't know how far humanity would go, but the human value of the input has been a massive relief for me. In part because I don't feel like I'm lying to people when I'm putting these out there and sending them to you. I'm actually getting honest, true answers from people, and am pleasantly surprised by that as well.
If you could interview anybody dead or alive, who would it be?
Anybody dead or alive?
You can give me one of each, one alive now, one that's dead.
Okay, go on, I'll go for that because that's more interesting. Dead, Leonardo da Vinci. Dead. And then alive, I would say Margaret Atwood.
What effect do you think the 2020 election will have on Donald Trump's legacy as a president?
I see Donald Trump's legacy. Most of the damage was done already. He had the better part of 4 years as commander in chief. Not that he ever acted like it. And he just ran roughshod over every democratic norm, every political convention. And in some ways, that wasn't necessarily a bad thing. It wasn't necessarily a bad thing to highlight the fact that the way the system worked wasn't working for people. He just showed it in the worst possible way. The 2020 election was, if anything, I think his last chance. He could have just gracefully conceded, said, I ran again, I lost, and I'm going to help. Instead, he was petty and he was vindictive. He just spread lies. He refused to accept ownership of his mistakes and his government's mistakes. And so I do think that the 2020 election, its outcome and the way he responded to that outcome, it's just enshrined his place in history as one of the worst presidents in American history, if not the worst.
Absolutely. You know, I was one of those people on tender hooks when the election I watched the Sky News coverage live pretty much for 3 or 4 days. You know, I was just waiting for the result. And I think people forget that, you know, it is a separate country. They are hundreds of miles away across another ocean, you know, but the outcome of this election will be detrimental, could have been detrimental to the entire world. You know, the Paris Accords, nuclear deals around the world, everything could have been altered.
There were two things for me. The first, as you rightly said, was the Paris Agreement. The Paris Agreement in particular, I think, is possibly Obama's greatest achievement. When you consider that the Kyoto Protocol failed, which was the previous, biggest international thing on climate change. But one of the others is the Mexico City policy, which is a policy related to US funding for abortion services, which effectively, and if I get this wrong, it'll be quite embarrassing, but if the US government is providing aid to an organization overseas, under the Mexico City policy, they can't even mention abortion, the person, the organization receiving the funding. It doesn't matter if they provide abortions or not, they can't even talk about it, can't even mention it as an option, which Trump put in place, which Biden has promised to repeal. I should say that Trump wasn't the person who created the policy. He put it back in place. It's always been this changing of hands. Reagan did it, Bush did it, Clinton overturned it, Bush Jr. did it, Obama overturned it, etc. But I mean, as you rightly say, it's not just one country. It's the entire world. And it's also, I think the other thing with Trump as well is he's a racist, and he's quite possibly a sex offender. And he's been allowed his entire life, but especially in the past 4 years, to commit any number of crimes, to commit offences against women and children at the border. And he's just been allowed to get away with it. That's his legacy. His legacy is that America was shown that man, and said, no. And if Donald Trump has proven to us anything in his life, it's that when someone says to him no, he won't accept it. But regardless, fuck him.
So as this is a very special Christmas episode, I have a little Christmas surprise for you, Kerean. Now, it comes in the form of a little redemption. As you know, we are both avid Doctor Who fans, and you recently had on Callum Mahoney, I believe.
Oh God, I had a funny feeling this would happen.
And might I say, he absolutely destroyed you. Just putting that out there. His knowledge of Doctor Who far succeeded yours, but as we both know, you're a bit of a know-it-all. I thought I'd give you the chance to redeem yourself this Christmas. So we're gonna go through a little Doctor Who quiz. Question number 1. What Disney film does the 10th Doctor quote when he steps out of the TARDIS at the end of the Christmas Invasion?
The Lion King.
The Runaway Bride, 2006, starring Catherine Tate. The Doctor finally reunites Donna Noble with her wedding party. Why is she so angry about it?
They had the reception without her.
Correct. You're doing well. That's 2 correct so far. If you didn't notice, all of these are they're Christmas themed, so they're all around Christmas
I gathered.
You're doing well. So you've got 5 to beat. 5 was Callum's score. Okay. So the third question. When the Doctor beamed down to London with Astrid Peth in Voyage of the Damned, who did they meet?
Wilfred Mott.
Correct. The fourth question. In the next Doctor, Jackson Lake's wife was murdered by the Cybermen. But what was her name? This is a more difficult one for you. I can give you some options if you'd like.
Okay.
So the options are Catherine, Caroline, Christine, and Clara.
Caroline.
That's correct. So this is your 5th question. So you have to get this one right now to tie with Callum's score. It's a very easy question. If you get this wrong, I'll be very disappointed in you. So what triggered the 10th Doctor's regeneration in the end of time?
Radiation.
Correct. You're now tied with Callum at 5 points. So you need to get this question correct to beat his score. Yeah. Okay. So the 6th question. What caused the Doctor's psychic paper to short out in the Christmas Carol 2010? Again, I can give you some options if you're looking for them.
Give me some options.
So the options are he was using it to create a paradox. He claimed to be a mature and responsible adult. He kept it too close to his bank card, and Kazran Sardik spilled tea on it.
He claimed to be a mature and responsible adult.
That's correct. Well, you've officially been redeemed. You are now the Why Is This a Podcast reigning champion. That's my Christmas gift to you this year. I'd like to thank everybody for joining us for this Christmas special of Why Is This a Podcast. I'm very honored to be here for this one special occasion, and I hope you and your viewers have a very lovely Christmas.
Thank you, James.